I'm an adult. I should be buying my own pot.
Wow. Never thought this day would come, you know? I would be honored and pleasured to facilitate this.
No. None of your dudes. I want to get my own pot, okay? I'm not going to be, like, holding my mommy's hand while I buy drugs. Like, I can do this.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be a grown-ass woman and do my taxes for once. Without my mommy and daddy. Gotcha, bitch.
Was there something that got cut that you wish would have stayed in, or the vice versa, something they wanted to get cut but turned out just to be, one of the highlights?
There's an episode of Broad City it's in season 2, I think it's episode 4, called Knockoffs. And it's the pegging episode, if you know what I'm talking about. And I know that the associate producer and our executive producers worked really closely with S&P, with Standards and Practices, as they were doing that episode, because it is, very risque. And they did such a good job that I was completely shocked that when we sent the final cut to Standards and Practices, they had no notes. We just they managed to just ride that line the whole way through. And that was shocking to me.
Yes, that is Ryan Cunningham, producer on such shows as Broad City, Inside Amy Schumer, along with dozens and dozens of other notable comedy specials. And Ryan is our guest today on Comedy History 101, where we school you in comedy. I am Harmon. Hello. And Ryan is our guest today, along with Lynn Harris, founder of Gold's Comedy, the comedy school and content studio where women and non-binary creators join a powerful community to create funny stuff. And today we are going to be talking about the history of inclusive comedy with groundbreaking shows such as Broad City and, of course, comedy as social change. But before we jump into the episode, a few quick plugs. On May 30th, 7 p.m. at the Red Room in the Lower East Side, I'll be presenting my show Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. No hokey gimmicks, no dumb themes. Tale brings you the best in New York storytelling. And on Wednesday, June 18th, at Fred's Doghouse in Williamsburg, I wrote a play. It's called The Roast of Graham Parsons, a dark musical comedy featuring the music of Graham Parsons, the godfather of alt-rock country. The premise is Graham and his tour manager, Phil, made a pact. Whoever dies first, the other would cremate their body at Joshua Tree. Graham died first. Phil stole his body. It didn't work out as planned. And on Thursday, June 19th, at Young Ethel's in Park Slope, I'll be presenting that 80s Improv Challenge. Yes, 3 improv teams compete by creating scenes from obscure and bizarre videos from the 1980s. And, of course, on Thursday, June 26th, at the Players Theater in the Village, we are presenting AI versus Human Roast Battle. Come out and see a human rapper take on a machine learning AI in a comedy roast battle of tomorrow. And we are so pleased because we are at our very new locale at the Players Theater in the iconic Village in New York City. And you can find out all about my shows on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at Harmon Leon. And also, show Comedy History 101 a little love. Like, subscribe, comment on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, or on our site, comedyhistory101.com, or on Instagram, Comedy Hiss 101. Wow, that was all a mouthful. And now, without further ado,
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
excuse me! Comedy History 101. Being this is Comedy History 101, why don't you each just tell a little bit about yourselves and your comedy history?
I'm happy to do that. The long version, which I won't tell, of my comedy history starts at, around the dinner table with my parents watching Laugh-In and I Love Lucy and The Muppet Show and all of those seminal comedy experiences that just kind of drew me to this world. I was the funny sidekick in the musicals as a theater nerd, and I did stand-up in starting in Boston and then in New York for about a decade. And then during that time and since then, I always thought, well, I love comedy and I love social justice. And wouldn't it be cool if I could do both at the same time? So even when I kind of not so much retired from stand-up, but just got tired of staying up past 10, I kept doing projects, campaigns, products, companies that blend, that leverage the power of comedy to change the world.
And Ryan, you've worked on projects that have changed the world. Just bring us all up to date.
Yeah, so I've been working in comedy for just under about 20 years. I started when I worked on the MTV sketch comedy show Human Giant. And then I went on to do the Electric Company for PBS Kids. And after that, I went on to produce almost 20 half-hour comedy series for the next, I would say, like 10, 15 years.
What was like a moment in comedy, because I think, we're tailing the conversation around inclusion in comedy. What was like an early memory of comedy not being inclusive, where you just definitely felt, what's going on here?
Well, I can say a lot of the comedy that I worked on early on was just like very bro-y. And it was interesting when I was working on the first season of Inside Amy Schumer. I remember sitting in the edit room and just laughing hysterically. And I was like, why do I like this so much? And I realized, because there were a bunch of women in the writer's room, and I was like able to relate to this experience so much more. And I think what's really fascinating is how I've seen that shift so dramatically over the course of 20 years. One of the things when I was putting together, I directed this stand-up special for Showtime that was hosted by Alan Cumming, and it was a queer comedian showcase. And when Showtime first contacted me about it, I sat down and I just tried to write down every queer comedian that I could think of off the top of my head. And I wrote down like 30 names just off the top of my head. And I looked at it and I was like, wow, 20 years ago, there was like one, and that was really exciting to me.
When you were coming up in stand-up, was it like what we hear about where it just be like, it's ladies' night of comedy and just that kind of horrible packaging?
Yes, as a matter of fact. And spoiler, that has not changed enough. So yes, back then it was very common. And this is not that long ago. It's, the 90s. It was exceedingly common to be the only woman on a lineup or to not be on a lineup because the booker would say, oh, I already have a woman. But then if you're the only woman on the lineup, typically, the MC, also a dude, even if a super nice guy and a talented MC would say something like, and now we got a lady coming to the stage, which I guess makes him like not that talented an MC. But then in that moment, what happens is all the dudes in the lineup have, 5 or 6 minutes to prove that they're funny. And you, the women, now have 5 to 6 minutes to prove that women are funny because they've framed you that way. And I will tell you that just recently, a stand-up I know was visiting New York. This is literally like 3 weeks ago. And she was looking at shows to see, and we looked at the schedule for insert name of very famous, long established club in New York City. And it was a Sunday night, and they run a bunch of different rooms. So they had 6 or 7 shows that night. And every single show, this is 3 weeks ago, had one woman on it. So here we are.
So, so you don't think we've gone, even though we feel like we've gone farther, you feel like the state of comedy today just really still has a major leaps and bounds to go?
Yeah, I mean, it's like what Ryan was just saying. It's a lot of things can be true at the same time. It has changed things have changed to a mind-blowing level. On the one hand, like women can be Ghostbusters now. So mind-blowingly different. At the same time, there are so many things that I cannot believe we are still dealing with, and both are true at the same time.
4 and 3 and 2 and 1.
First, Ryan, did it feel like when you were working on Broad City, when you started with the writer's room, just like from the very beginning, that it felt like it was like a definite like shift? I know like Broad City started like as UCB shorts, didn't it?
Yes, Abby and
So it was like DIY culture was also a big part of that groundbreaking, changing landscape.
Yes, I mean they had then developed it with FX for 2 years before it went to Comedy Central. So sorry, what was your question?
Oh, so how groundbreaking did it feel when you started? Was it like right out of the gate, or was there like pushback from the network, or did it kind of just like evolve from the shorts they did at UCB and keep in the same tone and voice?
Yeah, I mean, they had been in development with it for a while, but I think for sure the web series really set up the tone and the voice. I think I remember in the first season, the second episode of the series is called Pussy Weed. And we're having this whole conversation about how Alana travels with her weed stuffed up her pussy. I remember sitting in an edit room with Lily Burns, who's one of our executive producers, and she was just like, I have never seen anything like this on television before.
You just pulled a bag of pot out of your vagina.
And we were all just, very excited. I think, one of the things that Broad City did was it made it okay for women to be gross and sort of dirty, and that feels like a really fun legacy of the show.
Was like Comedy Central like always really supportive, or was it like, well, here's all our notes? And
Comedy Central was very supportive. It was interesting at first when I did Inside Amy Schumer first. And while I was on the first season of Inside Amy Schumer, I did the pilot for Broad City. And I think that Comedy Central was a little bit scared about having 2 TV shows starring women. So much of their, subscriber base, viewer base was men. And it had been kind of notoriously for about the previous 10 years. They were like, I don't know, can we have 2 shows on our network starring women? I don't know. They loved the show so much, and they believed in Abby and Alana so much. And, there was even like talk at one point of maybe doing a ladies' night and having, Inside Amy Schumer and Broad City in one block, which thank God they didn't do. But yeah, I mean, both of those, I remember there being like a very long time between when we finished the pilot for Inside Amy Schumer and when it actually got picked up. I know they did a ton of testing on it, and there was, a lot of nervousness, but I think ultimately Comedy Central really wanted to be in the Inside Amy in the Amy Schumer business.
Yeah, so even like not that far in history, it was like 2 comedies starring women on the same network.
This was 2011.
We already have one of those.
Yeah.
And then when you started teaching, Gold's comedy, what was the catalyst of the origin story of that?
Sure. So Gold is the comedy school and professional network and content studio where women and non-binary creators and, as we like to say, others are able to amp up their comedy careers and creative side hustles and join a powerful community and make funny stuff that gets seen and distributed. And the idea had been evolving in my mind for a long time, but basically it was to, help correct a lot of the things that we've just been talking about. Certainly not just in stand-up, but across the board in just the comedy world. First of all, because, as I said, why comedy? Why this? Just, I like comedy. This is my angle. And also because, it matters because comedy is a job and because women are people. And also matters in terms of social change because for two reasons. One is certainly, and I know we're going to talk about this more, but certainly when, comedy has a role to play in introducing new ideas, perspectives, identities, that it has a real power to do that in a way that can help shift hearts, minds, and attitudes. And it also just matters who's doing it. Whether it's, as Ryan said, when there's a woman in a writer's room, or when there are diverse perspectives in a writer's room, you just know by the way the characters are written. But also, whoever has comedy has authority. You're the one with the mic, you're the one with the punch, metaphorically or literally. And as we like to say, when you make people laugh, you make people listen. And so the power of just expanding who we see in the role of being funny matters. Who does comedy matters, because that contributes to who we think has power and who we listen to. And the more people with different faces and voices and every kind of difference, they're in that position. First of all, comedy is better, and it also makes the world a better place.
And what year was that?
It evolved for a long time while I was kind of doing other things. And the version that we have now really hit its stride toward the middle end of the pandemic. But I will say that the vision was always for it to be, even before the pandemic, was always for it to have an online headquarters, because the real kind of power and heart of what we do, certainly, of course, we have amazing classes, one of which, pretty much our favorite one, not our favorite, are one of our most popular, powerful classes is taught by Ryan, we can talk about. But it's that people come for the classes, they come for the events, they come for the activities. But the real tractor beam is the community. So that's why it was always conceived as being online. So for that access to reach and scale for people. And, and that's the idea, the comedy is hard for everybody. Comedy is hard for the straightest, whitest dude, of course. But we want to make it easier for the people for whom it's the hardest. And we want to build as much strength and power in numbers as we can, and kind of just flood the zone and make it not even that interesting to see a woman comic. One day it won't be so interesting. One day they won't call us female comics. One day they'll just call us comics, not like the ladies auxiliary or, God forbid, comedians, which is my least favorite word. So that was the vision. And I just enjoy being around comedy and being delighted by other people being funny and other people being creative. I just said to myself, more of that, please.
Yeah, and Ryan, you're on the board, or are you teach as well in Gold Comedy?
I teach a class, yes. It's a class that I originally developed for Rhode Island School of Design, which is where I'm an alumni.
You and the Talking Heads.
Yes. Yeah, Brizzy's a magical place. And I had created this for the film department. It was a class that I had been talking to them about that they needed in their curriculum for a while. And when they were starting to allow online teaching during the pandemic, I reached out to them and said, hey, that class that I've been telling you to teach? How about I just teach it? And so that was really great. And I got to develop the class, and I built out this 12-week syllabus for it. And I taught it there for about 2 years. And then I became a trustee for the school. And so I could no longer teach. It's a conflict of interest. And around that time, Lynn had, maybe just a little bit before that, Lynn had reached out to me and said, would you ever be interested in teaching a class? And I was like, well, I have this whole syllabus. We could do this. And I will say, as much as I love teaching it in college and to art students, you know, the class is about how to develop and pitch an idea. And I will say that, you know, the community at Gold attracts such really incredibly interesting women who have had these incredible experiences and wonderful life experiences, are oftentimes very accomplished in other fields, and are just like have this one story that's sitting on their heart to tell, and but they just don't know how to get it out. And so I find that, you know, there's a lot more interesting stories, I think, just because they have a lot more life experience than, say, you know, 21-year-old college students who I love dearly. But, you know, I really enjoy teaching it with Gold. I'm teaching it, I think, for the 11th time right now. And it's been just really kind of phenomenal. We've had amazing successes come out of it.
I'm trying to use the phone!
How would you teach like a different than just regular, you know, comedy class when you're focusing on, you know, specific community? Or is it just more about the community and a very supportive environment?
We just teach. It's the same. I mean, I think we have fewer, you know, in Ryan class and elsewhere, like probably the stand-up classes. Some of the people who come to us say, I tried to take a stand-up class somewhere else, but the teacher like led with, you know, jokes about his quote unquote dumb girlfriend or whatever, which, you know, we can talk about whether we can like be upset that that's sexist. But like, just like, it's just not, the dude is not good at your job if that's how you, if that's how you teach your class, because you're not recognizing your students, you know?
Yeah.
So
Ostracizing the people that you're supposed to teach should not be at the top of the list.
So, but we don't, yeah, when we don't teach different. I mean, we're super nice. We're super nice and we're super supportive, and we construct collaboration into all of our classes, but we're not the only ones who do that. But the answer is we just teach comedy. It's just that our space, and we do have, you know, there are some dudes around, or people who identify as dudes, whatever, it's fine. The thing that we really insist on and that we can promise is no bro vibe. But then other than that, we teach what we teach. We teach comedy, we teach everything from joke mechanics to, you know, pitching to development executives, just the best way that we possibly can. And people learn best in a supportive community, and that's what we create. But the curriculum is not different. It's just, but the content is also not obnoxious.
What would you say to the bro vibe? There's like this movement in comedy, and it takes place largely in Austin, Texas, and it's like they call like the free speech guys, you know. And what are they not getting?
I mean, I don't really lose much sleep over that, to be honest. Like I every comic can find an audience. Every style of, and you can make a joke about anything you want. It just has to be good. You know, I don't really think that. I think, you know, comics who complain that they can't say anything anymore are actually just saying those same things all the time. So they can totally say whatever they want to say. They just have to know that there may be consequences, such as some of your fans will like you and some of them will not, you know, or some people will not be your fans. And okay, I mean, I have opinions. Like, I don't really buy that, like, well, I'm just trying to be provocative is funny. I don't buy that being mean is funny. It's lazy, you know? It's just not, it's not because I'm offended. It's just not good craft, because, you know, the best comedy is surprising and delightful, you know, and that's my opinion. I just kind of gave some unsolicited advice to a very experienced, very talented comic who mainly just come on, dude, joke, making fun of people of short stature, you know, and using the M word. And I was like, and now that I'm perhaps a lot older than I look, just have no patience with like making people I'm not interested in making people comfortable anymore. And so I went up to him and I was like, dude, you're better than that. I was much nicer than that. But I was just like, why would you make fun of short people and use the M words that, by the way, is offensive to them? Like, you're so much better than that. And so to me, that was just lazy. Like, I was like, I didn't say this, but like, so the joke is that short people are short. Like, we could be offended, or we can just be like, that's not a good joke. It's no. It's not there. There's no surprise. There's no twist. There's no insight. There's no, oh, I never thought of it that way before. So my point is, I have opinions about, different kinds of comedy, but I also don't get very worked up because thank goodness, there are so many platforms and so many ways for different comics to find their people. And if I'm not the people of someone's comic, they're going to be fine. And so what?
Just a few last questions. Ryan, could you just tell us like a little bit about the day-to-day producing role, like say on Broad City? What exactly would it entail, just to give people a little bit of more of a background on that?
Well, so we had a whole producing team. My sort of specialty in producing is in post-production. And so I'm as a producer, I'm an editor that really, I'm sorry, as a producer, I really understand the edit in a way that I think a lot of producers who only work in production don't. And so I often end up, when I'm not on set, end up being the producer that's, in the edit room all the time. So I was in charge of, overseeing everything involving post-production, involving how production was going to do something. I was on set, advising on how they need to shoot certain things for an edit or for visual effects. And, really kind of majorly involved once production ends. And, working through cuts with editors and, managing network notes and, going through overseeing all the visual effects and sit and mix and color correction and all of that.
Was there something that got cut that you wish would have stayed in, or the vice versa, something they wanted to get cut but turned out just to be, one of the highlights?
There's an episode of Broad City called, it's in season 2, I think it's episode 4, called Knockoffs.
Simple yes or no. Did you or did you not? Peg.
And it's the pegging episode, if you know what I'm talking about.
This is the happiest day of my life!
And I know that the associate producer and our executive producers worked really closely with S&P, with Standards and Practices, as they were doing that episode, because it is, very risque. And they did such a good job that I was completely shocked that when we sent the final cut to Standards and Practices, they had no notes. We just sort of, they managed to just ride that line the whole way through. And that was shocking to me. The other thing that happened was when I was working on Inside Amy Schumer, is the first season we had to bleep the word pussy every time it appeared.
Okay, Mavis L. from Rancho Cucamonga writes, Amy, why do you talk about your pussy so much? Are you scared we don't believe you have one? We get it. You're disgusting.
I have to say that I have no idea what that is in reference to. No idea.
We
all know. I have literally never in my life said that word before.
And our showrunner, Dan Powell, got really angry about this in season 2. There was a clip of Amy in stand-up, and she said, my pussy is magic. And he was like, if we bleep it, no one will know what the hell she's saying. What are you talking about? And I remember him sitting across from me and just kept checking in and being we were trying to think of all the examples of ways that pussy is in use. And, with the Pussy Cat dolls and Pussy Riot and, things like that. And Dan ended up writing this very strongly worded letter to S&P, and they were like, okay, we agree with you. Because it was he was like, well, why are we allowed to say dick, but we can't say cock? Why can't we say pussy, but we can't say con, like, or something like that. And I apologize if I'm not allowed to curse here, but whatever. But yeah, so that is the reason why Pussy is no longer beeped on like linear television.
But I think when you hear beeping, you just think even the worst.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times you do it for comedy, yeah.
Would it be like you read about like early SNL when they wanted to get a specific thing through the censors that they would write like 5 other bits even more offensive than that just to get the one they actually wanted to get through? Would it be sometimes like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good plan. And the best thing, the great thing about Ryan is that she has all these great war stories, and like actually like that is a big difference that she was part of making in in vocabulary inclusivity in television. But also like there's so much Ryan has worked so hard in all kinds of inclusivity and visibility in all the work that she does with her solo shows and the pitching classes that we have with getting these like untold stories out in the world, working on representation around neurodivergence in her most recent feature film. Like it all adds up to so much impact that is like delivered with so much fun that is just so possible. And Ryan is really just an expert and a pioneer in that. In addition to having all these cool stories that are just cool on their own merits.
And what in like 2025 are we still need work on as far as like inclusiveness?
Neurodivergence. I would like to see so many more neurodivergent creators really getting work out there and kind of showing how they see the world. I think that will do so much for changing the sort of global understanding of neurodivergence.
We have a lot of representation of like neurodivergent, more representation than we have had about neurodivergent characters. But your point is also that the creators also play a huge role in that visibility. Yeah. You gotta see her feature film, Lone Wolves. It's so good. Speaking of neurodivergent creators and actors.
Yeah, and I guess just lastly, where can people find you and find out more about both your projects?
You can go to goldcomedy.com for Gold. And if you DM me, I will send you a link to either, you can DM me on Instagram at Gold Comedy or Lynn Harris. And I will facilitate 10% off either membership in Gold or tuition in Ryan's next pitching class, which starts in July. Or I'll just answer your questions if you have any questions. So Gold Comedy, Instagram, and website.
And I'm Ryan E. Cunningham on Instagram and Facebook, if anyone still uses that. And I have 2 websites for 2 projects that I'd love to direct people to. One is for my feature film, Lone Wolves, which we're in the process of nailing down distribution for. We're sort of wrapping up our festival run right now, which has been very successful. So you can go to lonewolvesfilm.com or follow Lone Wolves Film on Instagram. And the other one is I have a live comedy trivia game show called Wits End that's presented by Samantha Bee and hosted by Adam Kessner. And we have a new website called witsendgameshow.com. And we have a show on June 18th in Brooklyn at Littlefield where we have the cast of the George Lucas talk show, Connor Ratliff versus Griffin Newman.
Very cool. And is there anything that I didn't ask you that about any of your projects that you still would want to share?
I just think that, especially given Ryan's example and what I've learned from all of the, people who've been part of the Gold community, is that really anyone can find a way to connect themselves to comedy. Whether you don't have to have a certain personality, you don't have to have worked at the Harvard Lampoon, you don't have to already have done something, you don't have to not be shy, you don't have to be loud. There's a way to, whether you see yourself as a performer or creative or just someone who wants to be around comedy, there is a place for you. And it just takes finding a community and people who support you and doing it and some work.
And to add to that, I am an intense introvert who has had to train myself to be an extrovert for my career, or at least present as one. And, I also, if anything, took myself way too seriously for the first 25 years of my life, all in college. I was like, I'm a documentary filmmaker, and then, when I started working with comedy, it was just such a fascinating, better lens with which to view the world, no matter what is happening and how horrible the things are that are happening to you. You can always just be like, all right, but what's funny about it? And that will help you get through it, And that's, I think, the power of comedy.
And with that, we wrap up today's episode on Comedy History 101, and I believe you got schooled in comedy. Once again, the quick plugs. Friday, May 30th, 7 p.m., Tale at the Red Room. Wednesday, June 18th, Fred's Doghouse in Brooklyn, The Roast of Graham Parsons. Thursday, June 19th, Young Ethels in Park Slope, That 80s Improv Challenge. Thursday, June 26th, at the Players Theater, yes, of course, AI versus Human Roast Battle. And you can find out all about my show dates at harmonleon.com or on the social media at Harmon Leon. And of course, like, subscribe, and comment on Comedy History 101. Show us a little love. We love bringing you these fantastic episodes. Give us some comments on iTunes, a few stars on Spotify, or drop a comment on our site, comedyhistory101.com. And until next time, bye-bye.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Excuse me! Comedy History 101.